Here we'll explore how to evaluate all sorts of fractional powers, like 8 to the 2/3. But first, what's 8 to the 1/3 power? If you're not sure, click down here to review raising to powers with a 1 in the numerator, like 1/2 and 1/3.
Eight to the 1/3 is the same thing as the cube root of 8. In other words, we want a number that when multiplied by itself 3 times gives us 8. That number is 2.
Right, raising to the 1/3 power is the same as taking the cube root. So 8 to the 1/3 equals the cube root of 8, which equals 2. Next, let's look at 8 to the 2/3 again. Which of these expressions down here are equal to 8 to the 2/3?
Let's take a look at that first answer choice. 8 to the 1/3 all raised to the 1/3. That's equal to 8 to the 1/3 times 1/3, or 8 to the 1/9. Not quite 8 to the 2/3. There are two answer choices here that are equal to 8 to the 2/3. Can you find them?
Exactly. Whenever you raise to a power and then to another power, that's the same thing as raising to the product of the two exponents. 2/3 is equal to 1/3 times 2, and it's also equal to 2 times 1/3. So both of these expressions are equivalent to 8 to the 2/3. So try evaluating these two expressions. What's 8 to the 1/3 then squared? And what's 8 squared then raised to the 1/3?
Well, 8 to the 1/3 is the cube root of 8, or 2, and when we square that, we'll get 4. So that first expression is 4. Let's try the second one. Here we want to square 8 first. That gives us 64. And then we want to take the cube root of it. What cubed is equal to 64? Well, that's also 4. So both of these expressions are equal to 4.
Nicely done. 8 to the 1/3 is 2, so this is 2 squared, or 4. And down here, 8 squared is 64, and 64 to the 1/3 is the cube root of 64, or 4. So great! Both of these expressions give you the same result, just as you'd expect. And that means 8 to the 2/3 equals 4. So here's the general rule for evaluating fractional powers. Take the base, raise it to the power of the numerator, and then take the denominator's root. So 8 to the 2/3 means take 8, raise it to the second, and then take the third root. And you can also do it the other way around. First, take the third root of 8, and then raise it to the second. Either way, you'll get the correct answer, 4. For your next challenge, try evaluating these 3 fractional powers down here.
Let's take a look at the first one. We can write 16 to the 3/4 as one of two things. We could either write it as 16 cubed, all raised to the 1/4 power, or we can write it as 16 to the 1/4 power, all cubed. They're both the same thing as 16 to the 3/4, but one of them is actually a lot easier to evaluate than the other. Let's start by trying this first one. Well, first we have to cube 16. What's that? Well, it's a really big number. I think it's 4096. Next, we want to take the 4th root of it. What's the 4th root of 4096? Well, you can play around a bit and you'll find that it's 8. That's a little tough. Let's try it the second way. First, we have to find the 4th root of 16. Well, I know that 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is 16, so that's pretty easy. And next, we have to cube that. Well, 2 cubed is 8, so we get 8 again, but we were dealing with much smaller numbers, and it was a lot easier. Why don't you try using that same strategy to calculate 243 raised to the 2/5? 243 to the 2/5 is the same thing as 243 to the 1/5, all raised to the 2nd power. What's the fifth root of 243? Well, that turns out to be 3. And if you take 3 and raise it to the second power, we'll get 9. So that second one is equal to 9. Why don't you try the last one? We can rewrite 1 raised to the 13 over 17 as the 17th root of 1, all raised to the 13th power. But any root of 1 is just 1, and 1 raised to any power is also just 1. So that last one is just 1.
Excellent! The fourth root of 16 is 2, and then cubing gives you 8. The fifth root of 243 is 3, and then squaring gives you 9. And if you start with 1, raising to the 13th and then taking the 17th root still gives you 1. Let's quickly look at decimal powers, like 10 to the 2.489. Well, this is actually a fractional power as well. Which of these expressions equals 10 to the 2.489?
If we rewrite 2.489 as a fraction, we'll get 2489 divided by 1,000.
Precisely, 2.489 is the same thing as 2,489 divided by 1,000. So whenever you see a decimal exponent, you can also think of it as a fractional exponent. So how would you evaluate this? Raising to the 2,489th power and taking the 1,000th root seems pretty tough. So instead, try using the calculator to evaluate this expression and round your answer to 2 decimal places.
Let's open up our calculator and type in 10 raised to the 2.489. That's about 308.32, so 10 raised to the 2.489 is about 308.32.
So using a calculator, you can see that 10 to the 2.489 is approximately 308.32. So just to review, raising a number to a fractional power is the same as raising it to the numerator and then taking the denominator's root. And you also saw how the calculator can help you evaluate these kinds of powers.